Ms. Giselle. Oh, there we go. Recording is in progress. So my name is Giselle. Nice to see and meet you all. I am covering for Claire Cromwell. If you've joined Darren and us before, you're probably used to her. She's got a plethora of knowledge, so I will try to do her justice. And since it is a pretty advanced class, I will definitely relay all of your questions and or comments to Darren if I can to answer them. But I'm sure this is going to be a very fun, informative, and collaborative class today. Let's see. So any questions that you have, definitely go ahead and put them in the chat. I will try to answer you all. If I see a common thread, I will just go ahead and verbally answer. And I will, just moderate along and let you learn from Darren from all of his techniques. So Darren, take it away.
Okay, welcome to class. Today we are going to learn about Fair Isle knitting, and it's called Fair Isle. And sometimes when I speak quickly, I say feral, which it sounds like random stray cats are doing the knitting, but it's Fair Isle knitting. And what that is, it's a color work technique where you can change colors and you can do different designs within a project. And you can use lots of different colors and make the designs very different. So these two hats are both the same pattern, but just because I've changed colors, they look very, very different. So you can get a lot of different types of looks just by changing the colors. A little bit about Fair Isle. This is another example of a Fair Isle project. This, however, so something like this is not considered Fair Isle. This is more of a Norwegian style. Fair Isle has some very specific qualifications that make it Fair Isle. So we'll get into all that as we get going. So maybe let's go ahead and switch to the view of my hands, and we will jump right in and get started with that.
Darren, can you show the inside of the Fair Isle for some people that, what do you call that?
So the inside is called, you can either call it floats, or sometimes you'll hear it called strands. So it's the strands or the floats. And what that is this is the yarn that's not being used on the front. So when you see like 3 or 4 stitches of the white, you end up with these strands of red along the back. So, and here's where this white strand is kind of there, but spanning the distance between the red. But we'll get into all that here in just a little bit. Are there any, before we get started, any specific questions? Anything going on?
Right now, no, it just seems like everyone's excited to start.
Okay, so when you're making a project with Fair Isle, you want to really make sure that you're selecting the right kind of yarn. And what you want to make sure is that you have 2 yarns that they should be the same weight, so ideally the same yarn, but they should have a very strong color contrast. And when you think about color contrast, you can think about how light and how dark something is, like black and white, or you can think about like complementary colors like red and green, like orange and blue are going to stand out against each other. And then also think about the level of saturation, and that will also help to make sure you're getting a good color choice. So this is a little swatch that I've made for class as a demonstration. And you can see on the bottom here, I have burgundy and gray, or maybe you can't see it. It barely even shows up. So that was not a good choice. So this is just kind of an example of, why do you want to make a swatch and what the swatch can help us learn. So that burgundy and gray, if you made a whole sweater out of that, you'd probably be disappointed because it's not going to show up very much. So then I switched to the red and the gray. And so you can see that red and gray shows up quite a bit more. And then at the top, I switched to red and white, which gives us the most contrast. So you might want to start out a project with a very subtle contrast like this and move into something darker or more extreme, that could be an artistic choice, but just make sure you realize that you do want to be able to see your work. One way you can do that to make sure you're making smart choices, if you take a picture of the yarn that you're going to be using, like you're thinking about using these yarns, take a picture of them with your cell phone and then change that picture to black and white. And if all of the yarn looks exactly the same in black and white, then you're not going to get a super contrast. But if you change it to black and white and you can still kind of distinguish the different yarns, then that's kind of indicating that you probably will be getting a good contrast. That's a good way to kind of do a little pre-test. But then, of course, the swatch is the most important check, because that's going to give you like a real life example of how your yarn's going to look. So a gauge swatch, and I know that's a dirty word. Everybody hates the word gauge swatch. Everybody hates that little phrase, but it does tell us a lot of information. Fair Isle knitting is almost always done in the round. So traditionally it is done in the round. But if you're making a gauge swatch for a hat or for a sweater, you do also have to knit your gauge swatch in the round. If you knit your gauge swatch flat, then make your project in the round, you're not going to get an accurate result, because purl stitches are actually slightly looser than knit stitches. So you're not going to get an accurate gauge. And so one way you can do that is you cast on some stitches, you knit it flat, you use double pointed needles. Let me show you how I'm going to be doing that. Get some yarn going. And we're kind of faking it out. We're pretending we're knitting in the round, but we're just going to be knitting flat. So you knit to the end of the row. So this way you'll be doing all knits with no purls, which will simulate knitting in the round. So let me get to the end of this row to show you how to do a gauge swatch in preparation for your project. And then you just take this working yarn back to the side, and then you start from over here. And what's going to happen is you're going to end up with these strands of yarn going from one end to the other. Instead of knitting all the way around in a circle, you're knitting flat, but you're bringing those strands of yarn from here over to here to knit with them. And this will give you a gauge swatch that will be an accurate measurement, as the same as knitting in the round, because you're only making knit stitches to create this swatch. So that's just, for a hat, it's not such a big deal, but if you're making a sweater, you do want to make sure you're getting the right gauge. So this is just a little trick on how to do that. Any questions about making a gauge swatch, or what information you'll learn from a gauge swatch?
As of now, nothing yet, Darren. So I think, yeah,
Okay.
everyone's pretty familiar with the gauge swatches,
Perfect.
whether they like them or not.
Yeah, a gauge swatch is a dirty word. I mean, it's a little dirty phrase. People really do not like making a gauge swatch, but it is very beneficial. So, all right. So a little bit about, I'm just going to show you really quick how to do Fair Isle knitting, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics of it. And we're going to look at the chart, and we're going to review the pattern. So I've knitted up the ribbing for the hat. So this is just basic ribbing. And if I want to start adding another color, then I'm going to use this orange. And this orange is Heartland. It's Heartland by Lion Brand, and it's available at lionbrand.com or michaels.com. And this little ball of yarn, I've used some of this, so it's a much larger ball of yarn when you buy it, but I've been using this as part of my class. So it comes in a wide variety of colors. You could also use Wool Ease, which is a great yarn, very popular, and it comes also in a wide range of colors, and is available at michaels.com, lionbrand.com, or you could just pop into a Michaels store and get a look at all the colors and get to touch it and see how it feels for yourself. So that's the yarn that I'm using for demonstration. I think this white is actually, it might be Pound of Love. So, but it's just a little extra that I had. So to add a new color, it's very, very easy. So all I'm going to do, I'm not going to tie any knots. I'm not going to make any loops. I'm not going to do anything crazy. All you do is you just start knitting with that new color. So it's just that simple. And usually there's a chart to follow, but as I'm practicing, I'm just going to show you, I'm just going to randomly go back and forth. So I'm doing white, and then I can do orange. And really, this is all it is to knitting Fair Isle. You're just switching colors. And you arrange these colors in a way that will create a design. And you can do however you want. Okay.
Darren,
So-
someone's asking if you recommend a particular case on stitch or cast on, maybe that would
Cast on?
be.
It depends on the project you're making, but I usually use the long tail cast on. Sometimes if you need like a provisional cast on, or sometimes you can use a stretchy cast on, but I usually just use long tail.
Got it. Thank
So
you.
when you're working in Fair Isle, couple of rules to make it official Fair Isle. You only have 2 colors in a row. So in traditional Fair Isle, if we're going to be really traditional, then you only have 2 colors in each row. And you won't go more than 5 stitches without changing. So that's the maximum. You'd only have 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you have to change to the next color. So the chart, we're going to be following a chart, and the chart will, have all that sorted out for you. But for traditional, if we're going to be really traditional, you would only have no more than 5. Sometimes it's no more than 3, but depending on the chart and how traditional it is. And Fair Isle is worked up in stripes. It is not worked up in pictures. So like when you see the snowflakes, the deer, that is not technically Fair Isle. That is more probably either Icelandic or Norwegian style knitting. So all very good, but just specifically not Fair Isle. Okay. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of holding your yarn. So when I knit, I hold my yarn in my left hand like this. So this is very easy for me. And I can just choose the color that I'm going to knit with, and I'm good to go. So I find this to be the easiest way. But if you knit with your right hand, you can also do it with your right hand. And I don't knit like this, so it never looks good when I try to demonstrate it. But you can knit with your right hand and hold the yarn. However you normally hold the yarn in your right hand. If you flick it, if you pick it, however you do it, I'm sure you do it better than what I'm doing. Another way you can do it is if you hold it in one in each hand. So like I can wrap with this one and then wrap with this one. So you can hold them both in the same hand, or you can hold them in separate hands like this. Any questions about how to hold the yarn or how to join a new color or wrapping the yarn? Any questions? It's actually really easy. So
Not yet, but just to remind everyone, any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them into the comments, the chat box, and I will answer them or ask Darren.
all right. Part of the problem when you're working in Fair Isle or stranded knitting in general is you do end up, let me get a really nice long float. So we'll do 5, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to do something wrong so I can show you what it looks like wrong. Now I'm going to switch to the orange, and I'm going to pull it very tight, which you never want to do in Fair Isle. Now, what happens is you see this orange float right here. If that is pulled very tight, or too tight, what happens is these stitches will all get pushed together, scrunched together, and they will not be able to be released because this strand of yarn is not going to be stretchy. So by the time you continue to knit and tighten that up, you're going to end up having this bit will be puckered. And also, if you're making a hat, it's not going to be stretchy and fit on your head because you're pulling, if you're pulling your yarn too tight. So one thing you can do to help remedy that is just exactly what I'm doing here is if you pull your work out every now and again. So, and as beginners, I recommend you do this frequently. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches. And I'm going to stop and I'm going to kind of pull it out. And you might even want to give it a little snug this direction. And I'm going to do a couple more.
And Darren, one of our viewers actually asked, when carrying my yarns across the pattern, my yarn gets twisted like a candy cane. How does she avoid that?
All right, we'll get to that in just a second. So then after I've knit a couple of more, release it out of your hand and you can kind of stretch it out a bit. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want to allow it to all bunch up in your hand. Like if you're knitting like 10 or 20 stitches, you don't want to just allow it to all, and then I'm changing colors. And if it's all bunching up in your hand right here, then you're not going to be able to give yourself that slack. So don't let it bunch up in your hand. Every time you knit a couple of stitches, go ahead and pull it out. And then double check every now and then and make sure you don't want them this loose either. So this is too loose because I wasn't really paying attention. But you don't want them too loose, but you certainly don't want them too tight. And then another way you can help loosen them up is if you turn your work inside out and work on it as it is inside out. So as I'm working, I'll be looking at the back of it, but you can also look and see the front, depending on how you're holding it. And then it's slightly a larger circumference if it goes around the outside than around the inside. And so sometimes that'll help give you just a little bit of extra slack, okay? Now, the problem with your yarn twisting up like a candy cane, and that is annoying, usually if it happens, you can just hold it up and let it untwist. But one way of keeping that from happening would be to keep your yarn, keep them separate, and keep one color in each hand, and then you're more likely able to keep them from twisting, because you can see if I'm knitting like this, then the two strands of yarn are not going to cross each other and get twisted. Does that make sense? Does that help? Because you can see I can keep changing colors and they're not getting twisted. Them separate. If I keep them in the same hand, then they do tend to get twisted. Any other questions? This is I'm just basically just showing how it's done, just so that you at least have an idea of what we're talking about before I start into the pattern. So any questions at all?
There was just one other comment or question as to the twisting of the yarns in the back. So I think once you get into the pattern, then we could see all that fun work in the back.
So you mean the floats that are in the back?
I think so, yes.
So the thing about the floats in the back is you really don't want to think about them very much. Once you get into the habit of, trying to keep your tension nice, you really don't need to focus too much on the floats. They just kind of sort themselves out, but you don't want to, just don't want to pull them too tight or let them be too slack. And if you do have a whole bunch of, say I have 5 stitches, so I'm going to go 3 stitches. One thing you can do then is to twist your strands. And now I'm going to do 3 more stitches with the orange. I'll show you what that does for us.
So I think more specifically, the viewer asks, not the floats particularly, but does one yarn hook around another, or does it matter? I'm
not sure I understand what the question is. What was the question?
Let's see. Does one yarn hook around another. So I think I'm thinking that this is for Patricia. I think each stitch is just treated as an individual stitch.
Yeah,
which
each,
yes.
each stitch, and you don't really twist the yarn very often, except maybe I was demonstrating this where I did twist the yarn. I had 3 stitches. I twisted my orange and white together to lock it into place. And then I did 3 more stitches out of the orange. And that way, instead of having one float that's this long, I have a float that's only 3 stitches and then another float that's only 3 stitches. And that little twist kind of locks it in place. I don't know if that's what I thought that question was going, but I'm not sure if that, maybe whoever answered that question, whoever asked it, could let us know if that helps. Okay.
Yeah, definitely let us know. And then there was another comment, or do you always make sure one color is over the other? I guess something about color dominance.
Yes, there is. I always forget which is dominant. So if you're holding your yarn like this and the orange one is on top and the white one is on bottom, I think the one on top does become more dominant. And if you end up like switching them by mistake later on or something, then it will be a visible change in your pattern. So you do want to make sure as you're working, however you set it up with the white or the orange on the top or the bottom, that you maintain that same setup throughout the entire project. So that is a real thing. And I think it's the color that's on top that becomes dominant. So maybe if anybody knows for sure, they can help us in the chat with that. Any other questions?
Okay, let's see. So, all right, that's 1 yarn. Does 1 yarn, is it locking into place? So is it is the lock into place that I am referring to? It doesn't matter how you lock them. So I guess it's about, I guess, securing them or locking them.
So the long floats in the back. It doesn't really matter. There are different specific ways of doing it, but the way I always do it is I just twist it like that. Just one little twist. That seems to be the easiest way for me. And then when you, let me do 3, and then I just twist it like that. Just a base, so easy. It's so easy. You probably think you're not seeing what I'm doing, but it's just so easy. And then I'm going to do 3 more stitches, and then I'm going to knit with the orange. And then you can see, I'm not sure if that was, but that's how I do it. I just lock it like that. There are different ways of doing it. There are more complicated ways, but I always go for the easiest way. But if you do it a different way, I'm sure it's fine. As long as you don't want really long floats. Like back here, I had this really loose one because it's going to affect the gauge of your work. Eventually that slack will work its way to the front and you'll end up with really loose stitches in the front. Or it might get caught on something, like if it's a sweater and you're pulling it over your head, you might get it caught on a ring or something, and it might end up pulling and making your sweater look funny from the front. So that's why we want to lock our stitches in, our long floats. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that's what they were referring to. Finally, we got to it.
Yay. I thought that's where we were going with that, but I always want to make sure. So any other questions? I'm going to go to the pattern and start referring to the pattern unless if there are other questions.
Yes, no, let's get into the pattern.
Okay. Because once we get into the pattern, we're going to look at the chart. And the charts are very easy, but they can seem intimidating at first. So this is the pattern that we're going to be looking at. It's called Gretchen's Easy Tam. It's a free pattern from Lion Brand, and you can print it anytime you want. Go to lionbrand.com. You can print a copy. It's always available. Whenever you're looking at a new pattern, it's a good idea to read through the entire pattern to make sure you understand everything. This pattern is calling for Heartland yarn, Great Smoky Mountains, and it's calling for Heartland yarn Acadia. And so it's just 2 balls of yarn. You need double pointed needles. You need in size 7 and size 8. You need split ring markers. a large eyelet needle for weaving in your, so just all the basic things, stuff that you normally would probably need. We could go over, do we want to go over these increases and decreases as we come to them in the pattern? So pretty easy, it's really basic. It's worked in the round on 2 different sizes of double pointed needles. Now, I didn't use double pointed needles. I used 16-inch circular needles. But if you're living the double pointed needle life, then just enjoy your life. But I think most people would probably rather use 16-inch circulars, but you know, however you want. We start at the lower edge of the tam. The body is worked in stockinette stitch with our color work pattern. So I'm going to skip the notes and we'll just jump right into the pattern. So with the smaller needles and color A, you're going to cast on 80 stitches. And I did mine, like I said, I'm going to show you, I did mine on circular needles, which I find to be much easier. But the pattern is instructing us to divide the stitches onto 44 different needles with 20 stitches on each needle. So that means if you're going to be working with your double pointed needles, which I chose not to do. Magic loop would also be a good option here. You could do magic loop, you can do 16-inch circs, or you can do double points, okay? It's basic, knit 2, purl 2, rib. You're working until it's 1.5 inches. Does anybody need a review on knit 2, purl 2, rib? Probably not. If we're ready to do Fair Isle, we probably understand how to do ribbing.
There's just, yeah, somebody was asking about a magic loop, so you said yes to the magic loop. And then just going back to locking, should you always lock the same throughout the project?
We're locking the floats in?
Yes.
Yeah, I would do it the same throughout the entire project. Yeah, I would. Or you can try different.
We would. Okay.
You can try different ways and see which way you like better. They probably don't show on the front, but you know, I think you could probably do different ways. I would probably just do it the same just to keep it uniform. So, all right. So, where was I? So you've knitted your ribbing. We all understand how to do ribbing. And then you're going to change to the larger needles. Again, I would use 16-inch circs. I don't like to always do what the pattern tells me. Sometimes I think I know a better way, and sometimes I'm sorry, but sometimes it's good. So the increase round, still with color A, we're going to knit 1, and we're going to KF and B, and we're going to repeat around, and we're going to have 120 stitches. So basically, we're doubling our stitch count. Or no, we're not doubling it, we're increasing it by 50%. So are we? Knit 1, KF and B. No, we're doubling it. So I'm going to demonstrate KF and B just to make sure everybody knows how to do that. So a KF and B is increasing. So we're taking 1 stitch and we're turning it into 2 stitches. So you start out just like normal. You wrap your yarn, you bring it through, and then you wait just 1 second, and then you flip your needle around to the back of that loop, enter, wrap your yarn and bring it through. So now we've knitted 2 stitches into 1 stitch. And you always get this little bump, which is like a little tattletale that's telling you that something happened there. So you enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring it through, and then you jump to the back and you find the back leg of that loop, go under the back leg, wrap the yarn, bring it through, and just double check and look for that little bump. That means you did it correct. And now you've taken 1 stitch and turned it into 2. Okay. Any questions about KF and B?
Not for the moment.
Okay, so that's pretty basic. You've probably all done that before. Okay, so now it is telling us to begin chart 1. Chart 1 shows a 4-stitch repeat. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's look at chart number 1. Now, chart number 1, you want to look and see where the numbers are when you're following a chart. And when you follow a chart, you start at the bottom corner and you go this direction. And if you're ever not sure, look for the numbers and the numbers will tell you where to start. Now, there are not even numbers, it just skips them. So basically it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but they just left the even ones out just to save space, just so it didn't look so crowded. And another thing, you know you're going to be knitting in the round because all of the numbers are on one side. So you're going to be knitting 1, you go across and you knit 1, and then you come back across and you'll start row 2 right here, and then you go all the way around and start row 3. If you were going back and forth in a zigzag, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The numbers would be on both sides. But because we only have numbers on one side, that means we're going around in a circle. So we're knitting in the round. So if you ever find a chart and you're not sure of what it's telling you, that's one way of knowing. Find number 1, that's where you start, and then you keep going from there. So a little bit about this chart, about all charts really. You want to make sure that you're not losing your place in the chart. And you can use a Post-it note. This is a very simple chart, so it's not quite so hard. But you can use a Post-it note and move it up every time you do a row, and that'll help keep track of where you are. So I do find a Post-it note to be very helpful. But if we look at this chart, I mean, if we look at this hat, that looks very complicated, right? But if we look at this chart really does not look very complicated. So the first row, it's just all white squares. And so what that means is each one of these squares represents a stitch. And all of them are white. So the first row of the chart, we're just going to knit one solid row of one color. So if you're using white and gray or whatever colors you're using, one whole row is going to be just one solid color. So that's very easy. And so row 2, it's gray, white, gray, white. So it's a 4-stitch repeat. So how many stitches you have on your needles must be divisible by 4 or you will not be able to complete it. So you must have either 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. It must continue on and be divisible by 4. So if your stitch count is off, then you're not going to be able to complete the chart correctly. But this isn't easy. So you're doing orange, white, orange, white. So that's all you're doing for that one. Just orange, white, or whatever colors you're using. And it's very easy. And it's nice when you're changing it like every other color, every other stitch is a different color because that makes it very easy to keep your tension nice. You have these short little floats and you don't have to worry about keeping them too loose or making them too tight. That's why this is a beginner pattern, because it's supposed to be set up like that for you. And then row number 3, again, it's just solid. So you're just doing one row of just solid white. Row number 4 is a row of solid gray or orange, whatever you're doing. And then row 5, it's the opposite is row 2. You're starting with white, so it's white, gray, white, gray. It's very easy. Once you get the hang of it and once you get it in your hand, you'll see how easy it actually is. Don't get overwhelmed by the entire chart. Just remember, you're only doing one line at a time. Like when you get to number 3, that's a great resting point because you're just doing a solid color. And then when you get to 4, you're just doing the opposite color. So, just keep track of what you're doing, one stitch at a time. Each block counts as a stitch, and depending on the color of it will indicate what color you're supposed to do. Okay.
Darren, quick question for left-handed knitters. Do they follow the same right to left, or do they reverse that and start with the
No,
right to left?
you would follow it exactly the same. Knitting is a activity where we use both hands equally, so it's not really a left-handed or a right-handed activity. It's an activity where we use both hands equally. So If you're ambidextrous, this is the place, this is the perfect opportunity to shine. But yeah, you would always want to start at the exact same place, whether you're left-handed or right-handed. So I'm right-handed, but I wrap my yarn and I direct my yarn with my left hand. So the left-handed and right-handed is not as important in knitting. So if you're left-handed out there, don't let it.
So the charge, we start with the right and go around to the left. Yep.
Yes, you always start here. So otherwise your chart could be in reverse or, which is fine, but you just want to make sure you're getting the result you're expecting. Okay. Any questions about how to read this chart, how to start the chart, switching colors, any questions at all? I'm happy to take all questions.
No questions, but yeah, Pauline mentioned about the magic loop and suggested not to do a magic loop because you're knitting in the round. You could use another circular at the top instead of double points, but you would need very small circulars like 4s or 8 inches.
Yeah, however you knit in the round will be fine. Magic loop is a great technique for knitting in the round. It's not my favorite, but it probably is the technique most people prefer. Other than just regular circular needles. So if you're going to use regular circular needles like this for a hat, that's a great option. The pattern was indicating us to use double pointed needles, which is, I don't think, anybody's favorite. So that's why I was saying I didn't want to use double points, or you could start the hat on magic loop and do the entire hat on magic loop. But once we get to the top of the hat, like where this one is, the 16-inch circulars are not going to work out. And we are going to have to make a decision up here at the top where we either go to magic loop or double pointed needles, or as the student suggested, you could get like 8-inch circular needles, but sometimes even those you can't close it up completely. So just depending on what your favorite method is, that's the correct method for you. Any other questions about that?
Yeah, someone wants to know if you're carrying the yarn that is not being used. For instance, all white rounds. Are you carrying the orange?
No, you wouldn't need to. If you're doing one round that's just all white or one round that's all, you can just let that yarn. I mean, if you do carry it all the way around, by the time you get back to the beginning, it's not going to be attached to anything. It's just going to, you could have carried it around with you just for fun, but it's not going to be attached to, and you wouldn't want to lock it down.
One loose strand, a very loose strand.
Yeah, so if you're just doing a row that's one solid color, you would just leave the opposite color behind.
Drop the yarn.
Yeah, just drop the opposite color behind because you're not going to need it. And then just knit with whatever color is active. Yeah, because you wouldn't want to carry it around all the way around and lock it into place every 3 stitches because you're going to be wasting yarn and there's no reason for it. So
yes, very good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good question though. That's stuff like that, because I've done this for so long. Sometimes I forget about questions that a beginner might have. Sometimes I do forget. So that's a great question, actually. Any other questions?
Nope, you can continue. We've got about 20 minutes left to the class.
Okay. All righty. So after we finish chart number 1, we're going to begin chart number 2 with basically the next set of instructions. And chart number 2 looks like a crisis ready to happen. So when I was learning, and when I first saw something like this, I didn't know what was happening. I thought, well, if I'm knitting along, like, what do I do? Like, why is there empty space? Like, what is happening? Like, that doesn't make any sense. That certainly couldn't be right. But I'm going to make it very easy and show you exactly what's happening. So this triangle right here, and then these other 2 charts with this kind of upside down, negative shape triangle, these are, believe it or not, telling us the exact same thing. So if you follow this chart, or if you follow this chart, you're going to get the exact same result. And so what I've done is I've cut out some of these. This is trying to represent something that's round. And this empty space is basically the negative space. And if you're a seamstress, think about this as how a dart would be indicated in a sewing pattern. So there's nothing there. And what it really is going to happen in real life when you're working on it is it's going to fall into shape like that, and it's going to be creating the top of your hat. So that's what it's trying to indicate to us. So those negative shapes are not going to be used, there's, that empty space, and it's going to force our knitting into a kind of a dome, which will finish the top of the hat. I hope that helps a visual, because when I first started learning this, I had no concept of what was happening. And then if you're doing the other chart, which is shaped like a triangle, when you fit all of these triangles together, then you're also going to have the dome at the top of the hat, which will be, a nice smooth finish for the top. Show you. It looks, maybe it doesn't to you guys, but when I first started, it looked very, very confusing to me. So basically, it's each one of these, and each one of these will fit together and create the top of the hat. Or right here, this right here is this double decrease, and it fits kind of like that on the top of the hat. Does that make sense? What questions do we have about that?
No, you're explaining it beautifully, and the visuals are great.
Okay, because like I said, when I first started this, even after I knew what it meant, every time I looked at a chart like that, I had anxiety.
So it's like, right, that chart is two-dimensional, but for depicting a three-dimensional garment.
Yes. Okay. So unless if there are any more questions about that, I do want to talk a little bit about this chart. So this chart is a 20 stitch repeat. So you're going to have 20 stitches. Now, what I like to do, and just because I like to do it doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but it helps, it's very helpful for me, is I like to use stitch markers. And whenever I'm doing a chart, especially a long chart like this, it's 20 stitches, I will put a stitch marker on my work, and then I'll do the chart, and then I'll put another stitch marker, 20 stitches over. And then that way, I always know that those 20 stitches are that chart. And because you're going to be repeating it maybe 6 times, and if you get over here and get to the very end and things aren't lining up and you've made a horrible mistake, then you have to go back that entire row and figure out where the mistake was. But if you have it broken up into 20 stitch increments, which correspond with your chart, each time you come to a stitch marker, you've finished a repeat of the chart. And if you're on track, those 20 stitches are correct. But if you get to that stitch marker and it's not right, say you think you're supposed to be here and have white, gray, white, and you get to the stitch marker and you don't have enough stitches left, then you made the mistake in that repeat. So you can just go back over the last 20 stitches and find your mistake there. Now that makes a lot of sense to me, but I know a lot of people don't like to do that. But does that make sense on why the stitch markers can really help out?
I think people are really jiving it because there are no questions or objections to it.
Okay. So I do love a stitch marker. And so this chart, it's kind of divided in half because you've got this row of double decreases right up the middle. So another thing I might do is I might put a stitch marker right in the middle. And then that way, when I get halfway across, I can just double check and make sure I'm right, and then do the second half. I'm really fussy about stuff like that. I don't really like ripping out. So that's just something I do to just kind of make sure everything is just following precisely. So I do like a stitch marker. So once we start with row 1, see row 1 is on the bottom right. And this time they chose to list all the rows. So they're listing all the numbers, and all of the numbers are coming from the same side. So that's telling us we are knitting in the round. The first row is, or the first round is just like white, gray, white, gray, white, gray, until you get to the middle. And then you, or right here, you have 2 white, a gray, 3 white, a gray, and you're just following it straight across. Row number 2, very simple as well. Row number 3, that's the first time we're getting this empty space right here. We're getting this empty space, so we're just going to ignore that when we come to it. But what does this little, it looks like a little bird foot, right? What does that little bird foot mean? That means something. So let's look down here at our key. It stands for SK2P. So that doesn't help much, really. Let's read, keep reading. Slip 1 as if to knit. Okay, that's easy. Knit 2 together, it's easy. And we're going to pass the slip stitch over, and that's 2 stitches are decreased. So that's a double decrease. So let me show you how to do that. It's actually very easy. So we're going to slip 1 as if to knit. So the thing is, you want to make sure, usually when you slip a stitch, you slip it as if to purl. So usually when you slip a stitch, you slip it as if to purl so you don't twist it. However, it's telling us to slip it as if to knit. So we're just going to slip it as if to knit. So enter it as if you're going to knit it, and then just slip it over. And then knit 2 together. And then pass that slip stitch over. And this is kind of like a bind off. And that gives us a double decrease. So we're going to, I'm just going to do it again. Even though it's not done 2 in a row, I'm just, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do it again. So you slip it as if to knit. So you enter the stitch as if to knit, slip it over, and then we're going to knit 2 together. And then slip, pass the slip stitch over. So it's kind of like a bind off. And then you can see how that looks. And that gives us a nice little texture. So I don't know if it shows up on the hat, but it almost looks like a little cable. But that nice little bit of texture adds interest, and it makes it look a little bit more detailed, I think. I think it gives it a nice look. So, any questions about that double decrease?
No, none yet. We can continue.
Okay. So we're doing pretty good. And so the reason we have these empty spaces, the reason we have all this empty space is because we start off with 20 stitches. So each one of these squares represents a stitch, all 20. And then once we get to row 3, we lost 2 stitches on our decrease. So that's why we have this one and this one, they're gone. And same thing up here, they're still gone. We're only doing our decrease every other row, or round. I say rows, but I mean rounds. And then up here on row 5, we're losing 2 more stitches. So that's what's happening. That's why we end up with this shaping right here, because we're losing stitches, and that's the best way to represent that. Any questions at all about the chart?
No,
And then on this chart, you see it starts out the same. And then this is black and, I mean, because this is printed on black and white, all of these squares look like they're the same color, but they really were supposed to be different colors. They're supposed to look like this. But, you know, the black and white just made them all the same color. But the first 3 rows are just straight on, so there's nothing happening. And then instead of losing stitches in the middle, this is representing it by losing stitches along the end. We do our double decrease in the middle here, and instead of 20 stitches, we have 18, and so they're just moving them from the end. And so that's why it creates a different shape, but you get the exact same end result. It's kind of confusing. You'd think you'd get a different result, but you do get the exact same end result. You just pick whichever chart makes the most, this one makes the most sense in my brain. To me, even when I look at this now, even though I know all about it, it's still, my first thought is no. But we all have things that we like and don't like. So any questions about the chart? Which one do you like better? Which one do you think you would do, Giselle?
Yeah, the negative spaces kind of also give me a little bit of anxiety. So I think I'm with you.
Yeah,
But
that one for some reason seems more straightforward. So
yes, exactly.
all right.
Mhm.
So any questions at all? Anything else?
Nothing else. We've got about 9 minutes to the class is done, so I think we've covered a lot of ground. So
Yeah, I think that's the main that's pretty much what I have, unless if there are other questions. I'm assuming that people, because it's a slightly more advanced class, people know how to weave in your ends, and you know how to do ribbing, and so I'm not really going to go through the pattern point by point, unless if there are any other questions. I'd love to answer more questions if there are any.
Oh, nothing's coming up yet. So if anyone has any questions, remember to put them in the chat box so that Darren can answer them. And again, you said once you get to the top, do you switch over? I might have missed that. Do you switch over from the circular needle to double pointed needles?
Yeah, so once you get to the top, I don't know how experienced our students are with making hats, but this is a 16-inch circular needle. And I can still work with this for a while because my stitches are still going all the way around comfortably. But eventually, as you lose your stitches, as you keep doing your decreases, it's not going to go around comfortably. If your stitches are going to be stretched out, because the opening on top of your hat will be getting smaller and smaller, but your needles are still going to remain 16 inches. So that's what happens is stitches end up getting stretched really tight around your needles, and it starts being uncomfortable to work with. And once you get to that point, then you can either use magic loop, you could switch to double pointed needles. I'd probably use double pointed needles. Or if you have very small circular needles, like maybe 8-inch ones, you can try that, and maybe you can get it closed with that, or maybe you'll still end up needing double points or something. But yeah, once you get to the top of the hat, eventually you will need to switch to whatever your favorite method of knitting in small circumferences would be. Whatever, that's the right way, whichever one's your favorite.
Right. Oh, and one viewer, Yasmin, was very helpful. She actually Googled color dominance, and the dominant color is at the bottom of all the time. So now color dominance at the bottom. And she also wants to know if her tension is tight, should I work it inside out?
Yes, if your tension is very tight, that's one thing you can do is if you turn it inside out, this turned, and that does, it's not a miracle cure, but because if it's like this, you're able to look right here and still see the front of your work as you're working, but then you still also get to see your floats to make sure that you're not pulling them too tight. And also, if you measure the outside of this hat all the way around, it's going to be slightly bigger than if you measure it from the inside, because the yarn itself, the fabric, does have so much of a thickness. So that will help to give you just a little bit more flexibility in your floats. But it's not a miracle cure. If your knitting is very, very tight, you might need to go up a needle size, depending on if your knitting's tight or if your floats are tight. And if it's your floats that are always being very tight, just remember, do not allow your work to bunch up in your hand. About every 5 or 6 stitches, you want to kind of spread it out. Give it a little snug like this to kind of spread things out. But just do not allow it to bunch up in your hand, especially as you're changing colors, because you won't be giving yourself enough room for a nice float. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
I think so. And then someone wants to know, what is the best way to hold the 2 different yarns, color yarns for beginners using 2 colors to keep an even tension?
There's not really a straightforward answer with that. Depending on how you knit, would be that, it'll depend. Everyone knits differently. People hold the yarn differently. I hold the yarn in my left hand. And so when I do it, I like to do it like this, because that way I don't switch. I can keep, one on top and one on bottom. I'm not switching them. They're both available to me to choose whichever color I want. But if you knit with yarn in your right hand, that's not going to be the right method for you. And I'm so clumsy knitting with my right hand.
I actually knit with my right, and I do the whole like wrap around with my finger. So
I can't, you could do, some people do it like that. And this is not going to be very pretty. And then you can switch to whichever color, but there's not a, I hate to say there's not an answer, but it depends on how you knit comfortably. See, this would not be the way for me to do it comfortably, because it would take me the rest of my life. But for somebody that's with their right hand, that would be the perfect way, because you would have that muscle memory and you'd have that rhythm down. So you can try it having one in each hand. And then see, maybe start out having one in either hand, and then try it, different ways to see which way is right for you. It's really a personal preference. But usually when I do it this way, where I have one in each hand, by the time I get to the end of the round, I end up with both of them in my left hand somehow. So that's usually how I do it. But yeah, the best, you have to just kind of try it and see which way's best for you, depending on the way you knit, your knitting standard.
right. So just to remind everyone, this is being recorded. So if you want to go back and watch and listen to Darren's instructions, it will be available within 24 hours. So tomorrow afternoon or so on the Michaels website or on their YouTube channel, I believe. And I just put on Darren's Instagram handle, which is at Mr. Woolly Bear. He is our big teddy bear. And his Facebook name is just Darren Morris. So those are there in the chat box. Look him up, say hello, and he is very helpful. And
if you have any questions, I mean, everything makes perfect sense when you're in class, but once you get it in your hand and you start like trying to do it, you might have a question at that point. And if you do, please feel free to send me a direct message either on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll be glad to answer any questions to kind of keep you going along, so that way you're able to, learn and be successful and have lots of fun. So, all right. Anything else, Giselle?
No, everyone was very excited and thankful. They wanted to learn, and you delivered.
Okay, it's much easier than it looks. So
Yeah.
Don't forget to practice.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for coming to class. Have a great night.
All right, everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.